Okay, welcome to a delayed teacher podcast. First episode in a while, and I hear this term used. The friend of the show, Matt Ryan, is here today. Um, I like being able to say that. I have a friend of the show. I'm
It's
important.
accurate. It's accurate.
Yeah, you are a friend, and you are a friend of the show. So, Matt, we're here to talk about something a little bit. The podcast title for the overall conversation is "A Crisis in Conversation: The Decline in Discourse and Rhetoric on Twitter," and we'll see how long the conversation goes. But we've got some touch points to talk about. But before all that, we I like to have an opening question to kind of get a gauge of people and sometimes ask questions. So the question is, which decade would you want to live in and why? Uh, and I'll go first
Okay.
because I opposed the question. I wanted to give you some time to think. You probably already have your answer because you're an on your foot thinker. My answer would be okay. So there's two answers here. Okay, so there's the 80s. Now, mind you, I was born in 82, but I would want to grow up in the 80s versus being born in the 80s. So that means that I'd probably be born in like 75. So that I would, by the time I was like 85, I'd be like 10 years old. And the reason why is that the 80s is the ultimate analog time. There's no real internet. There's
Mm.
gaming that's kind of happening, but everything is very analog. There's no cable TV really that people can afford. It's very stripped down. The world is in some ways simple, quote unquote, but also completely complicated. It's also an interesting time, I think, politically and like major events wise. I'm not saying the 80s were perfect by any stretch of the imagination because I know that's the next thing someone's going to say. It was not without its issues, but for me, having been born in 82 and growing up in the 90s, 2000s, and having now being 41 in 2023, I've seen a lot, and I look at all the advances we've had and all the things we've done and everything, and it's just like, you know what? I just want to go back to a time where there was no Wi-Fi, there was no Wikipedia, there was none of like you actually had to work for it. You actually had to like dig in for stuff. You had to engage people, engage things. Mind you, of course, you had Ronald Reagan, you had Margaret Thatcher, you have all that political, blah. And I'm not saying that it's. I'm not just. It may sound like I'm just dismissing it out of hand, but it was a different time. But I'm looking at it more from the perspective of technology and what we had to distract us or what we had to kind of be bored with, and there wasn't a lot. You had to make your own fun. You had to be very creative, imaginative, and that's my answer is that I would like to grow up, quote unquote, in the 80s as a like a 10-year-old teenager at that time, because that would, I think, be interesting. It also means that I'd be older than I am now by 10 years. I'd be 50. So then I'd be more of like get off my lawn kids kind of deal. But
Maybe
um,
that explains why I'm the way that I am because I'm I was born I can say I was born in 77. So I get to
okay.
experience a lot of the 80s and
Hmm.
I even acknowledge in myself that I'm sometimes like old man yells at clouds. So
So what is your decade that you would want to live in or grow
I
up in?
I think that's a great question because I've posted on more than one occasion that I often feel like I was born at the wrong time. Like I don't know,
Mm,
I seem to be like attracted to things and thinkers and ideas from long before. Like I was just watching, well, not long before necessarily. I was just watching this week a documentary on the friendship between Groucho Marx and Dick Cavett, and I'm like,
mhm.
for some strange reason, even though I was obviously not living during those years, it felt
Yeah.
very like home, which is so
Yeah.
strange. But my immediate thought when you asked about a specific decade was the 1970s.
Okay.
And I'm saying the 70s because I think that's my favorite era for movies, for music.
Mm.
Um,
Not the favorite decade for fuel and energy, but
who needs that when you have great music and
yeah,
movies, right?
yeah, you could just sit in your Corvette, in the gas line, listening to
Yeah,
the best of list for 3 hours while you wait to get gasoline because there's a shortage.
exactly. So,
Well, I think, yeah.
No, really for no deeper reason than that, I think I'm gonna go with the 1970s. Can I
Well, I
keep the
think
modern medicine though? I kinda like that.
no,
No?
you can't.
Oh,
You
okay.
have to have the old school. Well,
Right.
and so what's interesting is like that's the challenge when you ask that question because there's like it's at one way simple. Oh, the music or the movies, and yeah, the '70s was an incredible time for film, incredible time for just music and creativity and probably even like literature.
Sure.
But you also have to take the political side. You have to take the '70s fuel shortages, the energy crisis, the the wars, the all of that.
Right.
It's all together, and so you have to. It's yeah. It's very interesting to consider what would be the perfect decade or what would be the perfect time to be alive.
Right.
Um, and there isn't really one because you talk about the '80s, you talk about the AIDS crisis
Mhm.
that came about in the late '80s, early '90s. You talk about the issues where around homosexuality and people's like opinions and feelings on that, and how terrible we were to people of that orientation. And
Sure.
so it's like, well, now we've come so far there, we've come a long way. We're still working through that. Then you talk about the '70s, you could talk about race relations, and so there's just like it's a very loaded question because no matter how you answer, you're wrong.
No, you're right. That's why I'm choosing, and this is just totally me putting the rules on your question. I'm just making this hypothetical very like shallow and easy
Yeah,
to think about.
right. I don't want to challenge. I'm. It's too
Yeah,
early in the
no.
morning for this.
Well, it
I will
reminds
say
me.
that.
Did you see Nikki Haley's tweet? I'm not gonna remember the word exactly. It was from earlier this week when she basically said something along the lines of like, "Remember how everything was so wonderful when we were young, um, and we could have that again if we defeat Joe Biden, right?" And people like, I think what she was just tapping into is just like obviously nostalgia, but
Yeah.
also a time where people, or at least fewer parts of life were
Mhm.
politicized, but then people rightfully
Yeah.
pushed back and were like sharing all these horrible things about
Right.
that happened in decades earlier. So I see that side.
Yeah, and this is again going to really a sort of deep cut, but it is that all sides kind of thing. Not to bring back the Donald Trump quote where he said like good people on all sides. I'm not.
Mhm.
That's not what I'm tying it to because I know that's the first thing people might think. That's not the goal. That's not the statement here. It's a phrase borrowing that I'm having to throw in here, but it is like you have to consider like the good old days. Yeah, the good old days, but we had like we didn't have Wi-Fi. We didn't have like this the ability to do this. Like I
Right.
couldn't get on a thing and record a conversation with somebody halfway across the country without it costing hundreds of dollars in long distance bills
Hmm.
and having to buy the expensive equipment to pull this off. Now I just do it because I pay Libsyn a monthly service fee and I get to record and upload podcasts. Like it's an incredible time to be alive. And I as much as I would love to grow up in the '80s, I also know that yeah, it wasn't a great time. There were a lot of things we got wrong, and we're still working through all of that. And I guess that leads us into our next conversation. I'm gonna put a marker here in the actual audio file to play my intro. So we'll be back here after the intro that I don't know if I actually have, but we'll find it. So just I'm gonna just pause in the silence, in the valley of silence.
Break your chains off. Turn the lights on. I'll be there when you're coming back to the world. Break your chains off.
All right, we're back to a delayed teacher podcast. Our overall topic conversation today is a crisis in conversation, the decline in discourse and rhetoric on Twitter. And if you're listening to this in the morning, which was when we're recording this at 9:16 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, I don't know what time it is in Matt's world, probably like 10, 11,
11. Yeah.
11. Okay, well, I'm having my first cup of Earl Grey, and I'm thoroughly enjoying myself because I love Earl Grey, and it speaks to a part of my soul. Uh,
Are they sponsoring this podcast?
Yeah, yeah, the many companies that
Yeah.
produce
Right.
Earl Grey, forget them. It's just Earl Grey. Earl
Right.
Grey, the consortium, the Illuminati version of the Earl Grey Corporation is sponsoring this podcast.
Love it.
I've got millions of dollars from all the dark money is coming in. That's what's happening today. This is what's powering this conversation. That'll get me into trouble. Okay, so you and I go back on this. We've talked on Twitter a lot over the years about this particular issue, and we'll start with the fight,
Okay.
which is my favorite thing. So you and I disagreed on something, and what was funny is that when I told you about it, you're like, "Oh, I forgot, I didn't even see that," and I was like, way to pay attention to your replies, Matt." Um, but the tweet that kind of started my idea about this is that on June 27th, Emily Hanford, who I have no idea who she is, um, she is apparently, I don't follow her. Oh, actually, I am following her. She's a senior correspondent for American Public Media. Um, she is in Washington D.C. She's got 36.2 thousand followers, and she made a tweet on June 25th stating, "Educators, are you concerned about reading instruction? Let Paul Thomas Ed know." And Paul Thomas Ed, who I don't follow, is a professor at Furman University. He's a teacher, writer, poet. Twitter is not my classroom. Tweets represent me only and no organization. And he had made a tweet stating claims of a reading crisis are almost always driven by media, the public, and political market interests, not educators. And so Emily was quote tweeting him and saying, "Educators, are you concerned about reading instruction? Let Paul Thomas know." And your basic tweet there was stating, like, "This tweet has been called incendiary and cyberbullying and an invitation to trolls. It's about the most mild tweet I've ever read around here, but there's a subset of folks," and you spelled out folks, FOLX, which I'm sure was intentional, who are after Hanford. And so we'll talk about where you sit on this and stand on this, and then I can talk a little bit about me. Do you still believe that, and why?
I do. And even as you read both tweets, the tweet from Paul and then the tweet from Hanford, Emily Hanford,
Mm-hmm.
I'm I still don't they seem like two very normal, measured, like things that I would see on Twitter every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I like his tweet. I don't think there was anything inflammatory. He was just making a claim, right? That
Right.
the reading
Yeah.
crisis, this idea of a reading crisis, is something that's, I guess, stirred up by the media, but just not educators. And so obviously, Hanford disagrees with that. And I guess people, maybe you, and you can speak to this. I guess people thought this was like an invitation to pile on, and I'm certainly sensitive to pile-ons, having been
Yeah.
the
Um,
recipient of more than one. I
yeah.
I don't see this as an invitation. Like this, and I'm looking at it right now. This seems very much an invitation to teachers to say, "Are you seeing this, or do you believe that there is a reading crisis? If so, let him
Right.
know." So
Yeah.
that's my take.
So it's interesting. So yes, you are Matt is correct. He has been the subject of many a conversation on Twitter regarding his statements. The favorite kind of pieces, the favorite ones have been about canon and your defend the canon. Even you, because you have your weekly chat or your monthly, is it a monthly or weekly chat on canon
Yeah, it's
or
usually
whatever it
monthly.
was,
Yeah,
monthly. And so that has been a constant pain point for a lot of folks about being uh, they get the I guess I get the best I can say is they get excited about the fact about your defend the canon and
hmm,
how your perspective on canon, what they think it is versus what the more nuanced reality is. And I think we did a podcast about that at some point. I'll
sure.
have to dig it up.
Yep.
So yeah, you've and in some cases, and I think you would be probably, and you can tell me I'm wrong, there are times where you sort of maybe invite it, where you ask to be kind of piled on a little bit, like you're trying to poke the bear a little bit, and you kind of get the response that you were looking for. Which there's nothing wrong with that because that's your choice. But I feel like sometimes there's a little bit of a sly smile out of you on when you kind of make these statements, and it's like,
Maybe
oh,
fair.
maybe Matt, you may okay, all right, you're on your own, bud. Which again, that's the power of Twitter. You can choose to engage that conversation or to post that and say, this is what I think, or hey, I'm trying to like, and you can try and kind of nudge and kind of shake it up. But
Right. I just
I'm
I try not to make it personal, and
right.
maybe that's your criticism of Hanford's tweet. I don't know.
So yeah, so let me so it's very interesting. So the tweet is again Emily Hanford. It's from June 25th, 2023. So depending on when you're listening to this, you're probably gonna have to dig through the tweets. I might find a way to like put a link somewhere on my Twitter stream so you can easily find it. Um, but the responses, so the ratio is there's 18 retweets, 19 quotes, 175 likes, and 12 bookmarks. Um, which is not as much as I was expecting to see sitting down here and talking about it. I was expecting to see a lot more after all the kerfuffle. Um,
Right.
but as I'm realizing, and we've talked about this, the outrage cycle is far shorter now than it used to be. There's a lot to get outraged about on social media, and so there's only so much outrage on one thing that you can do before you find the next thing, and you go, "Oh, now I'm mad about that," and it shifts to something else or to another issue, or another topic, or another person, and then that outrage piece or that concern piece that we were so stuck on, it doesn't get the attention, the long stand, it doesn't get the distance that it used to get.
Mhm.
It becomes kind of just a flash in the pan, and then we're on to the next thing that we got to be excited about, or rabble rousing about. What I took away from this is so, and I my tweet, my response was, "You ready for this? I disagree with Matt here." And the reason why I disagree is if this was like 5 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I think you'd be right. Be like, yeah, no, this is small time. This isn't incendiary. This isn't bullying. This isn't whatever, yada yada yada.
Mhm.
But in 2023 or 2022, it is absolutely an invite to pile on. Now, here's the deal. This is where I will qualify, because I don't want Emily Hanford, who has more followers than I have anything really. I don't have 36,000 of anything. That's just a little, that's almost my student loans. So maybe, I, I don't want to upset Emily Hanford and her 36.2 thousand followers, because I don't have resources to deal with that. But it's also perception, and I think so. I'll qualify this. Perception is reality, and I've learned that the hard way in life, that you may not have intended to have said a thing, or to have made someone believe this thing, or to whatever, but the power of perception is that whatever that they take away from that, whatever someone perceives, that becomes the reality. And in 2023, in the digital age, perception can almost be a contagion and almost be a shared perception of reality, and it to good, for good and bad, it can gather crowds, it can gather folks who believe in that same perception, in that same thing, and that can then propel a tweet or a person to be perceived by a larger group as, you've done this and this is wrong and we all believe this, so we must be right. um, so I qualify that because I understand, again, it's that I'm not I'm not trying to both sides this thing, but I'm also trying to, like, it's important for me to understand the pieces of the parts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it
Like,
does.
when you look at an issue, you can't just, I mean, I could have dashed off a tweet and then been or done a deep thread on this, but it it wouldn't have been useful because not many, I don't think anybody would have read it. I mean, they didn't read my tweet where I told you were wrong, which normally if somebody calls you wrong, they're like, "Yes, queen, yay, praise the Lord. Someone's telling Matt he's an idiot." Um, it got no traction. I was like, okay, I guess, and I was fine with it. I was like, all right, whatever, moving on. But I think that that's also interesting because my reply was substantive. Anyway, so my point is, I get why people kind of got their druthers about this, because it's 2023 and you quote tweet somebody. If I quote tweeted we'll take an example like a Christy Nold, who is a Twitter person on teacher Twitter, and she's had various perspectives and she's got ideas. And I actually still follow her, so she's got 17.6 thousand followers. So I want to be very mindful of how I have a conversation about her. But if I quote tweeted her and said Christy's wrong here, you need to tell her why she's wrong. That would be uncalled for, because now I'm asking people to go after her and tell her she's wrong, that she's the person who's not right here. We need to convince her that she's wrong, and that she needs to turn it around and she needs to change her mind. That's the perspective that a lot of people were taking from this, because they've seen a lot of quote tweeting. And
Yep.
she did kind of come after you a little bit. She said, "Is this you?" Because she spotlighted a tweet where you said, "One thing I've come to believe is that quote tweeting a good faith reply so that all your followers can pile on is nearly always a classless move." And I think you kind of lawyered your way through this, to be fair. You said it is. She didn't quote tweet a reply, and then she replies, "So it's not classless if it's an invitation to pile on, but wasn't in the form of a reply. You have some very interesting rules." Your reply was, "A reply is a part of a conversation. If I were to take this reply from you and quote tweet it, that's different in my book. I don't see anything classless or respect of anything approaching a pile on in Hanford's tweet." And then Andrea, who's Teach BK and who has more followers than I have anything really. All of these people have more followers than anything than I've ever had, or anything that I've ever had, which
Same.
is yeah, which is,
Same.
I mean, you. I'm okay with that. Like, I'm not like being like, I want more followers, I want to be famous. I don't
Hmm.
really want that, but you have to be this sounds really terrible, and maybe it's not terrible. I don't know. You listeners, you can make up your mind about how this is, because I don't have a feeling on it yet. Um, but she said, "Let him know that it's more than an invitation, that is encouragement. She absolutely knows her followers, the behavior that would ensue."
So can I
Um,
just jump in right there though, and then you
Go
can.
ahead.
Well, it's interesting that she said that, because I thought about that. So I went back to the original thread, the original tweet, and as you pointed out, there was very little engagement with it. So
Yeah.
I guess that supposition was incorrect, because as far as I can tell, there was really no backlash from her supposedly terrible followers.
Right.
So that's all I wanted to say to that.
So then, but yeah, because I'm looking at it now, and there's um, Christy obviously had a response. Um, but there are also some interesting, so like Dr. Rachel Gabriel, she said, "Newly concerned, no, educators have been concerned about access, achievement, and conditions and equity in reading instruction since before compulsory public school began in the US, before Brown v. Board, before LD was a category, before podcasts. It's why many of us became teachers." That's actually a thoughtful response. I'm like,
Right.
okay, there's a
Sure.
lot to unpack there. I'm very interested in. Um, and even like some people that I would usually be like, okay, what are they going to say? Um, but then there's some of the regular folks that we know that would do this. One is Tom Rademacher, Mr. Tom Rademacher said, "I would love if you would respond to the criticisms below on inviting a pile-on, and would love even more if you would be public and loud in your condemnation of those using your work to push push book bans and bigotry." Which again, there is, so this is kind of along the lines of our conversation. The responses seem to be these days either significant and like deep when it comes to the discourse, or just like, "You're wrong, and here's some other things I'm going to throw in to associate you with, because you've done wrong and you're not doing this right." Because what he does is he says, "Hey, respond to the criticisms about the pylon." Okay, cool. All right, that's fine. But then he takes it even farther there and says, "Would love even more if you would be public and loud in your condemnation of those using your work to push book bans and bigotry." That's an incredibly loaded statement.
Yep.
Like, you've started out saying, "I would love you to respond to the criticism below and find a pylon." Okay, in my opinion, yes, she probably needs to respond to that, and that's an accurate question. That's not outside of kind of like the normal kind of, "Hey, this might feel like this. I don't know how you feel, but could you talk about it, please?" But the danger with discourse is then we want to kind of get a zinger in there, or we want to get that thing of like, "Yeah, this is you, yeah, you're really wrong. Not only are you wrong, you're really wrong." And that's where it becomes, you need to be public and loud in your condemnation of people who are using your work to push book bans and bigotry. And that's, i I'd have to do context. I'd have to do a deep dive into this lady and say, okay, is her work being used to push bigotry and all this other stuff? Like, I don't understand that, because there's no details, there's no explanations in the tweet of, okay, well, how is that happening? Like, where is her work being used to do that?
Well,
Um,
especially a topic like reading. Like
mhm.
reading is going to be a topic that
Oh
is
my
going
god.
to draw in people from all across the political spectrum. So
Yeah.
I think
Well,
to
not just that, but political and pedagogical. Like
sure,
this summer, there have been, I don't want to call them reading wars, but there have been like some significantly like explosive conversations about reading and how reading is done and phonics and all like so much um, because people have beliefs in reading. They have beliefs in like what it should be.
right.
And
So
I don't, yeah,
well,
go ahead.
I think that's the problem. Like if you're choosing a topic that is so universal, because pretty
Yeah.
much everybody at one point in their life learned to read, um, and continues to still do so in some way or another, to
Yeah.
expect someone to have to answer or to address every issue that their followers may or not adhere to, I think it's unreasonable, and I think it's just a way to discredit the source.
Yeah.
So
I was there was a I'm trying to find this. There was somebody tweeted about reading and then I lost my brain and now I don't know where it went. Oh, was it? No, that's not what I wanted. Give me a second. I'm gonna
sure,
find it, and if I don't find it, then we'll just keep moving on.
don't edit this out.
Yeah, no, it's gold. It's podcast gold. I think. I Now this goes back to somebody tweeted, and I probably won't find it. It's not that important, but it was a conversation like where have people been talking about like reading all these years? All of a sudden, we're all talking about it, and like where have you been these last
Right.
whatever kinds of years? And I think that's um, I'm I'm scrolling back through my Twitter profile and um, I'm looking at my Rockies, the massive loss that we endured
Come on.
on a Saturday,
I,
and that was just miserable.
See.
Uh,
I think there's another thing we probably disagree on. I think it's one of those things that's it's just so bad it has to be good. Like you saw something amazing. You saw something
yeah,
amazing. I don't know.
well, oh my gosh. So we'll take a small rabbit trail off. So that there, and because I was talking to somebody else too about this, and he was like, "You just witnessed history. Like
Right.
my son would have loved to have been at that game." And I was like, "Great, but you're not a Rockies fan. Like you're not sitting. I mean, we spent some money on those tickets,
Sure.
and it was really good seats. And it was like, you gotta be kidding me. This wasn't even a game. This was a disaster."
Yeah.
But I think this is a bit more controversial, I suppose. There's a video. Um, it's I think it's Louis C.K. and he was on Conan O'Brien, and he says everything is amazing and nobody's happy. It was 11 years ago, and it kind of came out of this conversation about like everything, like the world is bad and everything's horrible and la la la. And he's like, no, you don't understand. Like we get to fly in planes, we get to sit in a metallic tube and fly above the earth at 400 miles an hour, and that's incredible. You can go online and something can be like you can and it's there for you right away. You don't have to go out and hunt. Like he made this point of like nobody's happy but everything's amazing. And I think to your point about the Rockies game, to kind of close out that conversation, is that it was pretty cool. Like yeah, the Angels broke their record for the amount of runs earned in the first like scored in a game. Their original record from the 70s was 24, and so they made their 25, and that was history. And there was other historical aspects of it that was like, okay, this is kind of a big deal. But it's that moment of like, man, I wanted to see a Rockies
Yeah.
win. And it was funny because the two games on either side, they had won the game before, and then Sunday they won the game by a run, so they won 4-3. And it was just like we got the bad one, we got the awful one. Okay, so I guess here's the other question. We've talked about this before. Twitter has changed in how we talk to each other. Um, and again, this is the whole problem with the good old days conversation is there was plenty wrong in old Twitter, and there's not things that are great about current Twitter. But do you remember when it changed? Do you remember when suddenly, and it may have just been a progressive change? I don't know, but it felt like we actually did have conversations and disagreements, but they never became you're canceled or you're done or you're dumb or you're bad or you're wrong on the wrong side of history. Clearly shouldn't be a teacher. Do you know when that feeling changed, or is it just kind of was it just a we all woke up one morning and we're like, oh my gosh, we're terrible to each other?
Maybe this is probably too simple, and it could be totally wrong. Because you're right, it is a good question because I think part of it is just looking back through the hazy, fog of memory. It's not
Yeah.
always the most accurate, but
Nope.
honestly, and maybe it's just because I want to blame this for like everything that's wrong with the world today. But I just want to say Trump. But I say that kind of seriously because I really feel
Yeah.
like the rhetoric that he used
Yeah.
as a candidate and then as a president,
Yeah.
I feel like it just blew the doors wide open and gave everyone permission to just
Be
throw
awful.
to throw tact and diplomacy out the window. Not that we were all
Right.
like kind before that and you can go back
Right.
and find, but I just
Yeah.
think like things that politicians never would have said,
Hmm.
now they're just saying it cavalierly and casually from one day
Yeah.
to the next, and when no one's blinking an eye because Trump just like I said, just blew the doors off.
Yeah. I think it's, and this is going to be real. Again, we agree on a lot of things. There's also stuff we probably disagree on.
Hmm.
But in this, I think because I was thinking about it too. I was like, when did our public discourse change to be? And this is going to sound a little. I don't know if this will make sense, but it no longer became a community conversation. It became almost like a selfish. I have to make my point known. I'm right. No one else is wrong. No one else is right. I'm the only one. I'm the victim here. This like that shift when again when Trump became candidate and took to Twitter, and I think that whole I think you're right. And it'd be here's the thing. So we as a culture, we as a shared consciousness here in the United States as a community of people, we take our lead a lot of times from our political leaders, our entertainment leaders, our culture leaders, our influencers, if you will, to borrow that annoying term. But we take our lead from them. We look at them and say, okay, well, the president is holding himself above the fray. The old, part of Michelle Obama's speech at the DNC many years ago was, "When they go low, we go high," and that 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 structure and that stiff upper lip, to borrow the British phrase, um, really held. Like we were like, hey, we need to follow this because everyone else like has managed to pull this off. The president doesn't get down in the muck with his opponents, or he doesn't get down in the muck with China, or he says, hey, this is the president speaking and the royal we, and this is the
Hmm.
presidential voice, and the voice of the White House and the voice of the country, and I am the president of the United States, and we believe as a country that. And so there was that kind of tone, aesthetic, that it was like, yeah, we don't yell at each other. We do have a actual like conversation, whether or not it's a good conversation. We at least try and explore the issue through like strong discourse with detailed rhetoric and all those things. And then I think you're right. It was that summer of when that whole stuff kicked off. It was like, oh, I can say all the things I want because the president does, or the
Yeah.
candidate, like the GOP nominee does.
Yep.
It was interesting. If you look, I think if you probably did a study, there's probably a doctoral study that you could pull together on like that a cycle when there was like what 15 candidates for the GOP nomination, and it was an incredible slate. Like,
Hmm.
not to be political on this show, but as a former Republican, I looked at that at the time and I was like, oh my gosh, we have such a diverse like slate. We've never had this before. This is incredible. I'm so excited. Like we have such possibility. And then things didn't go the way they were supposed to. And so it became a situation where like, and this is going to sound a little strange, and you can tell me I'm wrong because I'm wrong a lot of times in my life, but people were looking. People, I think, had been bottling up and not been able to like express themselves very well. And suddenly there was a guy who was saying exactly how they felt. And they no longer, like you said earlier, had to sit and be within a structure. They could say what they wanted and they could say it how they wanted. And nobody was going to tell them otherwise, because guess what? Donald Trump is saying it, and he's making it okay. So if the candidate for the presidency and then the president of the United States is saying these things in this way, well, then I can do that.
Yeah.
And the worst part of it is the part that makes me sad. I won't use the word disappointed because that sounds like I'm a dad. I'm like, I'm disappointed in you, son, because I'm not a dad to the presidency or the politicians, but everyone else joined in on both sides, on all sides, on all corners of the political and cultural spectrum. They they didn't step back and go, wait, this is not, Mr. President, this is not acceptable. We can't do this. This is not cool. Nobody said no.
Or very
Nobody
few
said
people, or very
very,
few.
right. And
Right.
nobody with a standing of, yeah, this is, hey, I have, I'm a former president, or like this, hey, we need to talk about this. Like, let's not do this. But and I think it spoke to people's this. I always say that like were always shocked that Trump won, and I'm like, well, I'm sorry. I was on the inside for a while as that political party. When he was elected, I changed to independent because that's my jam. And I said I knew it was coming because he was saying exactly what a good portion of this country wanted to say or felt like needed to be said. Now, did he say it inappropriately and brusque and pretty brutal and awful and not? Yeah, it was bad, but they didn't care. And nobody else seemed to care. They're like, "Oh, Trump, he gets our ratings." Like, there's a reason why, like, all of the major cable operators and major news stations gave him so much airtime, because guess what?
Hmm.
People wanted to watch him. He was new. He was different. He was saying the things that need to be said, or saying the things that were no one else will say. And yeah, it drove their ratings. They made money off that man.
Yeah.
But the problem is,
Careers are made on Trump.
yes, but here's
Books,
the problem.
books, and
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
yeah. No, incredible amount of
yeah,
media and just that. But the danger and the monster that we created is the entire media operations, for the most part, permissed it and promoted it.
yep,
And when you do that, short term, yeah, you get ratings, you get that money, you get to solidify yourself as a leader in the political conversation, and you can run ads about your ratings, and more people watch this channel than the other channel, and we're leading the way, and we're making a difference, and da 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 da. But what you've done in the long term is you said this line of discourse and this tone of rhetoric and this tone of all, it's okay. It's cool. We want this. We want more of this. Let's bring in more. This will get you on the news. This will get you in a seat with Tucker Carlson. It'll get you a seat with Anderson Cooper. It'll get you where you want to be if you can do this in the same way. Man, we want to put you on the air because, man, you'll get eyes, you'll get ears. People will listen to you. People will want to listen to you. People will gravitate towards you. And what you do is you create this concept of, well, we can do that no matter what then. And what I've heard, a constant refrain I haven't heard as much, but I still hear sometimes, is like, and I'll like reply to somebody and I'm like, that's really not cool. Like, what are you doing? It's like, well, they do it too. I'm like, that doesn't make it okay.
right,
Like, just because, but we've created this idea that everyone's doing it, and that makes it okay. And I think that's the crux of the issue is the discourse and rhetoric is not just an issue on Twitter. It's across the board.
right. But it does. I think it does connect back to Twitter, because I think the message
Yeah.
also is the more outlandish, the more brash, the more incendiary thing you say, the more views it's
Yeah.
going to get, the more replies it's going to get, and I think
Yeah.
that's a huge part of it. And also, to kind of connect it back, I think as you were talking, I think I might even have a better answer for your original question, and
Okay.
I'm interested in what you think about this. I think maybe the quote tweet changed Twitter more than anything
Oh,
else,
okay.
right? Because I think that gives, before you could reply, and if you
Right.
wanted to quote tweet, you actually didn't remember, you had to write like, or I think people would do it in a different way, but I think people would say like RT,
Yeah,
and
RT,
then
yeah, and you had to
right,
copy and paste or whatever.
right, and
Yeah. Oh,
so
I remember those days.
yeah, and
Oh,
so
I'm a Twitter OG.
so I think that probably changed everything, because then that
Yeah.
since we were talking about pylons and all of that, I think that just opened up the platform to all of that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably what it is. And I think we all have different rules, right? There's no like one real standard way to behave on Twitter. So we all have different rules that govern how we participate. And going back to
Yeah.
that comment that you made from like 15 minutes ago about my distinction when it comes to quote tweeting,
Yeah.
my distinction, it's not lawyerly or anything. It's very real on my part.
Yeah.
Is if I quote tweet a reply, like if you and I are having a Twitter conversation back and forth, and
Yeah.
then right in the middle of that conversation, I take one of your replies and then tweet it
Yeah.
out. To me, there's a whole world of difference there because first
Yeah.
of all, it's out of context, right?
Yeah.
You if by tweeting that out, that person, unless they're gonna have to go back digging if they really want to, and they're probably not going to see what led
Yeah.
to that remark. And it also it just I think it's just disrespectful because you and I were having a discourse, and then all of a sudden you're just like open the door and everyone come on in. So
Right.
uh, so maybe Trump, but maybe more so the quote tweet.
Well, I think it's probably a twofer. Like it's because I think the quote tweet feature was before Trump and all that.
Really? Okay.
Um, I can't. Oh, let's find out, shall we? Let's do some mid show googling. Quote tweet feature debut. When was the date? Quote feature debuted. When is what is where? Oh, 2015.
Okay.
So
That
that
was
is when was the election? That the election was around that or
well,
the pre gaming was around
that
that
would have been
time.
yeah, that would have been the right in time for the campaign in
So you're I
2015.
think you're right. There it's the chicken and the egg argument, but not because it really that amped up the ability um to do that. Yeah, it's happened April 7th, 2015 is when that kicked off. That's
Yeah.
crazy. I oh man, it's funny when you look back on stuff and you start to go, okay, well, what was the you start to it's called a fishbone exercise, I guess, but you start and really dig into, okay, well, what caused this or what made this what it is, and that's I think you're right. I think it is that quote tweet, which then just naturally lent itself to that. But I will agree with you in part on the fact that yeah, if you pull a tweet out of a conversation, you quote tweet and said, oh, he's wrong for this, and I'm fairly certain that at some point in my Twitter career, I have probably done that maybe once or twice and probably regretted it. I'm sure if you, I mean, again, I have so many tweets that I have to dig through to figure that out. Um, I
Well,
just, yeah, I go
well,
ahead.
I think that's part of it too. Like I think the rules also change for us because we see how we kind of watch and see how others are using these tools and how others are
Yeah,
responding, and so then we might have to take a step back and say no, like I thought this was originally okay, but then maybe it's not.
yeah,
And so I think these things are always changing, and sure, like there's definitely things that I've done and said on Twitter that if I went and looked back at it, I probably would be horrified. But I think part of it's probably something to do with the behavior or the how people were using this platform at the time.
right. Um, I will stand by, and again, I think it's one of the very few things that we disagree on. I will still stand on the fact that I think Emily Hanford's tweet was ill advised, or her retweet quote. I and again I could be I'm probably throwing glass. Wow, that was a metaphor. I was going to say I'm the one throwing glass stones at a brick house, but that's not how it works. I'm the one probably throwing the bricks at the glass house, because I may have done this in the past, but I've worked at it to try and not get myself into that rut of doing those things. But I still think that again it got some traction, but it didn't blow up in the way that I think that people thought it would. But I still think that it's in 2023 as a Twitter person or a Twitterati or whatever you want to call us, we have to be mindful. And that will probably push some buttons too, because it's like you shouldn't have to cater to people. Um, and I think if it was my personal account, I'd be like, okay, I can do whatever the heck I want. It's my personal account. I'm doing whatever. But I have a Twitter account that's a delayed teacher. Like
Hmm.
there's a certain standard I hold myself to that hey, look, if I wouldn't do this to a kid in my class, I'm not going to do it on Twitter. If I wouldn't do this, if I was going to, if this is a bad idea to do to my principal, I'm not going to do it to on Twitter. And I think I run that filter through a lot of what I do. There have been tweets that I've composed that were incendiary, things that I'd be like, oh my God, why'd I say that? And I've deleted them, or I've not even finished composing them because I'm like, okay, let's think about this: family, friends, boss, students.
Yeah,
If it's going to run up against any of those four, and their expectations of me and what they view of me, and to the level of accountability that I hold myself up against them, I'm going to delete the tweet, or I'm not going to even finish composing it. And I used to do like a tweet if I ever saw like something political or religious or anything that I was upset about, or I was like, that's, I would tweet out, I will not tweet about politics. I will not tweet about politics, and then just post that. But I
yeah.
even kind of gave up on that because
Oh
it's
yeah.
like, well, that's passive aggressive because it's suggesting that I have something to say, but I'm pulling my punches. I'm just going to pull my punches and not say a dang thing about it because it's not worth it in 2023 to try and start something. And I think that's the issue I have with Emily Hanford's tweet is that, you know, I think if you remove the quote tweet out of the equation and she was to say, educators, hey, Paul Thomas, would you be interested in having a conversation? If she had started with that of actually asking him, hey, I have some teachers who probably would be concerned about reading instruction. Can you explain more about what you're thinking? Or hey, can I take, because it's in a thread. Like he's got a whole thread where he goes through. I mean, there are, what is it, 9 tweets here. I got to get back up to the top of this. So yeah, there's like 10 tweets that he talks about this, and he's got articles linked in there and stuff like that. So I think for me, it's just like, as a teacher, and maybe that's my problem, I'm looking at this through a lens of a teacher. Emily Hanford is a senior correspondent for American Public Media. Like she's a journalist. She's not held to the same standard as a teacher, I guess, maybe, or it's a different standard that she
Right.
is held to. And maybe that's my problem. Maybe I'm trying to project my responsibility and how I handle responsibility on Emily Hanford, which obviously that would be inappropriate, but it just feels kind of slimy. That slimy is not the right word. It just feels like kind of dishonest. Especially because she's a journalist. I think that's the other layer of, like, if you're a real journalist, you're not quote tweeting someone and saying, hey, educators, are you concerned about this? You should let him know. It's like, ma'am, maybe you should dig into the, like, tweet out the, like, thread and say, hey, teachers, I'd be curious, or hey, take a look at this thread. I'm writing an article about it. Teachers, can you give me some feedback on this, or something like that, where it's like, yeah, okay, this is actually productive. This is actually going to help you write a story. Or I know it sounds like I'm making all kinds of excuses and trying to, like, just have it all the way, have my cake and eat it too. But
Yeah, it just seems like I don't know. As I listen, it just seems like just a different way to word the same thing. I
yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel right. Does that make sense? Like, it
No,
just doesn't
fair enough.
feel. I
Fair
just
enough.
I look at it and I go, was that the best way we could do that?
Yeah, I
And
maybe.
it's weird because I'm actually agreeing with multiple people that I generally don't agree with in
Yeah.
this whole reply stream, which is hilarious because there are people in there who have been less than pleased with me in the past. I'm like, huh,
I just even think it may be even simpler. I think a lot of people that didn't like it, you excluded, just don't like some of the stuff that she's
yeah,
written or said. Because I'm
yeah,
sorry, I've seen people that have criticized her. I've seen them pull the same thing and worse.
yeah,
So I really do think it might be that simple too. And
yeah,
and to be fair, I on this particular issue, I definitely side with Hanford. So
yeah.
I acknowledge that there's bias there, but I also I've seen people on my quote unquote side
Mhm.
behave in a way that you know have been appalled by. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It is. It's equal. I say this a lot with things because it seems to help me kind of navigate it. That it's equal parts simple and it's equal parts complex.
Hmm.
Like, there's a simple answer of like, hey, I don't feel that doesn't feel right, or hey, like, for you, it's like, yeah, that's fine. That's a fine way to engage the discourse. But it's also complex because now there's that perception and all that other stuff.
Can I ask you a
Okay.
question? Can I ask you a
Oh,
question?
sure, Matt.
Let me
Sure,
take
Matt.
over
Let's
let
go.
me take over this
Let's,
podcast.
okay. All right. It's yours now. It's
But
now the
I'm
Matt podcast.
whew. No, I'm generally interested though because what if she had, instead of actually quote tweeted him, what if
Mhm.
she had screenshotted the
Oh
tweet?
no.
No, I'm
I knew
serious
this.
because I've seen
Yeah,
this
yeah,
done before, and I've seen, like,
yeah.
and I have mixed feelings about this as well. So what if she had just, instead of like tagged him by using his
Right.
this
Username,
yeah,
whatever.
what if
Yeah.
she just like screenshot it and then said the same exact thing?
Oof. Because I know out there somewhere, not somewhere. I know there are. I could probably offhand list at least 3 to 4 people who right now, if they're listening, are going, "You know what the right answer is," and I'm like, ah. But I mean,
Don't
here's
listen
the
to
thing.
them.
Well, sometimes I do, which I like that I do have various people that I follow that are definitely in different parts of the argument when it comes to a lot of stuff, which I appreciate. I see the thing for me, screenshots, that's dangerous because the screenshot app manner or behavior, um, and this is for me only. This is not a judgment on people who do it. This is not a statement on they're wrong or whatever. But my feeling is that it's dishonest because if you're screenshotting something and then posting it to the world and saying, "Well, what is this? What's this all about?" It smacks of, well, I'm not willing to engage this person because it's I don't want to, or it's not it's too much work or whatever, or other things I think it might be. I think it's really dishonest. I think if she had screenshotted it, I would have been more upset. I've been like, okay,
Yeah.
that's really dumb. That's just, and because what's going to happen is eventually someone will be like, oh, hey, Paul Thomas, Emily Hanford screenshotted this. And
Right.
then it's going to become a whole nother thing because it's like, well, why didn't she? And then Emily, again, this is not be her response, but as a metaphorical, nope, theoretical, there it is. A theoretical response would be like, well, I've engaged with Paul Thomas before. He's been disingenuous. I felt threatened by him. His followers have not been kind to me. I didn't want to tag him because that would have then brought upon me more. And that's a statement that people have
Yep.
made in the past when they screenshot it. They're like, no, I didn't want to tag him because that would mean that he would then come into my mentions or his followers would come into my mentions. And that is an actual phenomenon. It does happen. I'm not
Hmm.
discounting that at all, but I am saying that, like, it's a delicate line to walk because I get it. Like, but here's the thing: if you know that person, that you and that person or him or her or whoever, you don't get along or you've disagreed so in the past that it has invited recriminational tweets on both sides. Like, why would you? What's the point? What is putting that screenshot out there going to do?
Yeah.
Is it going to further the conversation? Maybe, but is it more likely going to create more of a kerfuffle over the fact that you didn't tag them, you're not engaging them, you're just putting a screenshot, you're trying to shame them? I mean, that's the questions that are generally asked along that lines. And it's, yeah, I don't if I have to screenshot something because I don't want to tag that person, I probably shouldn't be doing it in the first place, because if there's legitimate concerns, if I tag them and there's going to be a safety issue, or I'm going to get harassed, or I'm going to get, quote tweeted, or I'm going to get ratioed, what's the return on investment for me? It's nothing. It's in
Hmm.
the negative. Why would I engage in that knowing what's going to happen and knowing what's going to come? Because it's not going to do anybody any favors. It's going to amp up the sewer digging into the sewer in the ground and the mud. So yeah, but again, I know there are people out there who are like, no, well, I need to show, the world needs to see what this person's doing. They need to know, it needs to be exposed, and it's like, but it's not genuine. It's a very disingenuous way of doing things. Again, it's a personal view. If you do it, I don't, no judgment here. I
Yeah.
don't care. But for me, as an educator, as a Twitter person, and I've been around on Twitter since it started, like long time ago. Um, it doesn't feel right. And I think that on the, if we're ranking if we're ranking things that you shouldn't do on Twitter, the do nots,
Yep.
I think screenshotting is at the top because it just,
Yeah. I don't
I
like
don't
it.
know, it doesn't.
Yeah. I think the way you put it, it doesn't feel right. I think that's a good way to put it.
But I think on the other side, kind of, it's just not to beat a dead horse, but what's the point?
Right.
What does it do? Okay, well, you get it out there, but you're not engaging in conversation. You're just trying to shame. And I'm sure I know there are people out there who be like, well, that's the point. I was like, yeah, but what's the ROI? I mean, in
Sure.
the short term, sure, they get beat up, they get a ding, they get ratioed on their own because you screenshot, like, you sent them to find them and talk to them and whatever. But why not? What, just if you're gonna if Twitter is the public square. If Twitter, as Elon Musk, our new Lord and Savior CEO, I say that somewhat sardonically and sarcastically because that's a whole other conversation. Says that Twitter should be a public square, should be a place for conversation and whatever, and that he's a advocate for free speech. Again, a completely loaded and complex statement that will require us to dig into the actual reality of what he's doing with Twitter or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Then if we're going to do that, then we can't be trying to like put up these screenshots that don't really engage the town square conversation. Um, so I that doesn't really answer the question, but it just kind of says I don't know. I don't like it. I don't,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that everyone has to do what I do. Like there's
Nope.
how I do Twitter and how I engage with Twitter and how I engage with people has changed a lot. And I don't think people would agree with half of what I say that you should do because they don't feel that that's the appropriate thing because they have their own view of things and that's fine.
Sure.
I'm a states' rights kind of guy when it comes to Twitter.
Sure.
You're your own state. You can make up your own ways of engaging with it. So there was a tweet that was sent out from the Intellectuist, which is a online community dedicated to the human experience. You must accept the truth from whatever source it comes from. A quote from Maimonides. I should know how to pronounce that being a language arts teacher, but I don't. There's a video from Governor Pritzker. And the governor he's Illinois' 43rd governor. And he recently gave a speech at a university. And he starts off, because I think this is kind of the conversation. This can kind of be a way for us to kind of close this out a little bit. I got to mute this. I'm going to read the things. So he starts out saying the best way to spot an idiot is look for the person who is cruel. Now, when it comes to the rhetoric and the discourse, like that's okay. It's a pretty, I know what the goal was, is he's getting their attention. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm going to listen to this guy. He's got something to say. But the theme of this invocation is the smartest person in the room is the kindest person in the room is often the smartest. And he goes on long on the predication of when we see someone who doesn't look like us or sound like us or act like us or love like us or live like us, the first thought that crosses our mind is that that's either fear or judgment. What we have in our brain, in our brain that we have as humans, and he says we survived as a species by being suspicious of things that we aren't familiar with. And I agree with that statement. I think that that's been a survival instinct for millions of years for humans. In 2023, it's very different. But he says in order to be kind, we have to shut down that animal instinct. And it's interesting because I think that people would look at this as an argument for their side.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think this is an argument for both sides, for one side or the other. I think it's an argument for all of us to kind of close this out. So he says empathy and compassion are evolved states of being. And I would agree with that. And if you have any feelings, feel free to jump in. But empathy is different than sympathy. Empathy is, I've been through this. I know what you're going through. Let me sit with you. Versus sympathy is like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. Here's a card. Bye-bye. Empathy is, man, I've been there. I've been something similar. Let me sit with you. I'm not here to solve your problem, but I'm here to just be. And compassion, and this is going to get a little religiosity for a second, so forgive me as we drift into that lane. But compassion is a thing where it's for everybody. You don't just have compassion for one person or one group of people. Compassion is for all. It's not an isolating kind of thing. And I think if we look at Twitter, do we have that? And I don't know what the answer to that question is. I mean, I know what the answer is on its surface level of what I've seen over the last 10 years. I don't think we have that anymore. We don't have empathy or compassion for anybody. We have it for who we want it to be. We've selectively decided, okay, well, this is the group that we have empathy and compassion for. But the people who are in opposition to that or on the other side of that or are in adjacent lanes to that, no, we don't. That's not what we believe. He basically says it requires us to step past our primal urges. And I don't I don't know. What do you think? I guess.
I I I, I think a lot, and I think the interesting thing was, and I think you kind of you kind of frame it nicely. Anyone who watches his remarks, it, I think initially they're going to come away with agreement. Like, of course, I agree with that, right? But then, how is it practiced? And I think
Yeah.
even words like empathy and compassion and kindness,
Yeah.
I think they can look so different. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what about tough compassion? Is that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to use a I don't know, to use a really kind of silly example, but I'm an English teacher, so that's kind of where my mind is going.
Yeah.
Um, if I find a student has plagiarized an essay,
Yeah.
am I being compassionate if I turn the student into the administrator for
Right.
the punishment as listed in the handbook? Is
Mm-hmm.
that compassionate?
Yeah.
Um, I think there's an argument to say that it is compassionate because part of that process is hopefully teaching the student that they never want to do this again. But it
Yeah.
could also look from the outside that it's not compassionate, that it's harsh, that it's mean. Um, so, I feel like I don't know. I feel like I'm punting on this a little bit, but I just think even when we talk about things like kindness and compassion,
Yeah.
um, and I also really do believe that most people do act out of kindness. I
Yeah.
really do think most people aren't looking to be unkind to others, but I just think but they're just convinced, or we're convinced that our way of thinking or our way of acting is the
Mm-hmm.
compassionate one, is the compassionate way. It's sometimes hard to see that it may not be. If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, and I think you're right. Is that compassion? Both of these, any of these words or any of this conversation, I think it has to be predicated on there are two sides to that piece of what compassion is. Compassion is not just lovey dovey. I love you. You're the most amazing person ever. You can do no wrong. I think compassion is when someone messes up, having the compassion to have that hard conversation of,
Right.
hey, dude, you plagiarized.
Right.
What the heck? Like, I'm not coming for you like a shark, but man, what was going on? What was going
Hmm.
through your head when you did this? Because and then maybe it may just be like that's not how we do things. Like, that's not how we should be acting. And having the compassion to have that kind of what you were saying, that hard conversation of, we need to figure out a way to do this better because we don't. And obviously not like throwing them under the bus and running them
Sure.
over like three different times with the tires, making them feel like they're an awful person, but going like, having that compassion to go,
Right.
missed the mark on that one.
Yeah.
Let's figure that out. And but doing it in a way that's not like it's the end of this is the end. You're done. You're kicked out of school now. Bye. See you
Right.
later. But
It's
I
the
think you're right.
Yeah, it's a cliche, right? It's judge the action, not the person, right? And it's
Yeah.
cliche, but I think it's true. Like every time I've caught a kid plagiarizing, I always say to that student, I don't think less of you as a person. I don't think
Right.
you're a bad person. You made a
Right.
mistake.
Yeah.
This is something, how you respond to this mistake is going
Yeah.
to say more about who you are. So yeah, and actually maybe even a better example, and something that I've tweeted about quite a bit recently is, I think it's a great example, is the idea of trigger warnings, because I think everybody that
Mm,
uses a trigger warning, of course they're using it um, out of a desire to be compassionate to
yeah.
others, right? No,
Out of their concern for others'
of
feelings
course.
and their situation, etc. Yeah.
Of course, but then you look at the research, and there's been like six
Yeah.
studies since like 2020 or something like that, and study after study is showing that these trigger warnings have little to no effect, and in fact might ultimately be more harmful than good.
Yeah.
And when I've brought this up to people, it's a really hard, even with the research, it's a really hard
Yeah.
hurdle to get over, because I get it. It feels right. It feels kind to be using
Right.
trigger
It feels it
warnings.
it feels good. Oh, I'm doing the right thing.
Right.
This is gonna sound a little weird, but I'm gonna try it out, and then I'll see if I believe what I'm about to say. But it feels performative. It's
Hmm.
not actually trying to figure out, hey, we're about to read something. Like, here's what's going to happen. Just be aware of it as we go through it. Versus this following content is, going to contain this, this, and the other thing.
Hmm.
It's less of like working with the person and being like, hey, we're getting to that passage where there's gonna be some stuff. Let's get through it. let me know what you need help with. Like, let me help you work through this versus don't read this. It's bad, or it's not, it's going to trigger you or whatever. And this is not like a definite feeling right now to anyone who's listening, so that you're not like starting to get excited. But it feels the trigger warning piece in the way that I feel and perceive that it's being applied is that it's performative. It's not actually substantive. It's not actually, the purpose behind it has been lost.
Yeah, I think that makes it like, or this is something that I'm supposed to do, right? And so
Right.
therefore I'm going to do it.
Right.
Um, and I feel that way about a lot of things. Oh, should I say it? I don't know. I feel that way about. I went to a graduation. I
Yeah.
won't say the school. It was a local university,
Okay.
um, and it began with a land acknowledgement,
Okay.
um, and it was just really strange, and it almost
Hmm.
read like a prayer and an apology, and it just
Yeah.
I don't. I have, and so here's where I stand on that. I don't know. I haven't read the research about this particular topic, so I don't really. That's probably
Yeah.
why I haven't really said a lot about it.
Yeah.
But it just, I wonder if it's one of those things like a trigger warning that it feels like the kind thing to do, but I wonder if it's actually getting the result that we want.
Yeah, that is, so there are obviously people on Twitter who have that in their Twitter bio about, I live on this occupied land and this is originally this person's land or whatever.
Right.
Um, and there was a guy who did talk radio here in Denver for years. He's still alive, but he doesn't do regular broadcasts. His name is Mike Rosen, and people have feelings on him as it is anyway. But Mike Rosen would always say something about, here's where I sit and here's where I stand.
Hmm.
And so what I interpret that is, my sitting is, this is what I'm thinking about. This
Okay.
is what I'm marinating in this. I'm sitting in this. I haven't quite made a decision. I'm still trying to figure this out. The I stand is, well, this is where I'm going to take my stand. This is what I'm going to stand on. I'm going to stand at the lectern. This is what I'm saying. This is what I believe. So I'm still sitting in this one. Um, my gut reaction,
Same.
my immediate is, what is the point and what is gained, and what purpose does it serve? Does it do something to move the conversation forward, or is it, as I kind of speculated earlier, is it more performative? It's a checkbox.
Hmm.
It's a thing that we have to do, kind of what you were saying. Like, it's, again, to swerve into the religiosity, is it more of a religious act or a
Hmm.
religious, like a Catholic, oh well, we get on our knees on the thingy and we do a thing and we do our Hail Marys and then we stand up and we say the thing and then we sit down and then, okay, we're moving on, we've checked the box.
Yep.
It's rote memorization at this point. Again, nothing against our Catholic friends out there. And I think you might be Catholic as well. I think I've just pushed your button. But like, it's that to take a step outside of that. It's that, is this more of going through the motions just to be, or is there an actual, like, yeah, we're going to acknowledge it and then we're going to actually do these things to bring in that population as a matter of ownership. Like, there again, if you can acknowledge it, but is it, what's the purpose and what's the point and what's the long game here? Is the long game to return those lands
Hmm.
to those indigenous peoples? Which, if that's the case, okay, let's have that conversation. Let's work through that. Let's figure out what that might look like. I personally, at where I sit, again, not where I'm standing, I'm sitting in it. My reaction would be, I don't know if that's possible. I don't know what that would look like. I think there would have to be like, okay, is there going to be sales tax that's sent to those tribes? And is there a financial piece to that, since we now occupy their lands that they once occupied back then? Like, so it's equal parts simple and equal parts complex. Again, this is all in what I'm sitting in. No decision. I haven't decided where I stand on it, but I think you're right. It's that, okay, what are we doing? Like, where are we going with this and how are we doing it? And I don't have a definitive answer, and I'm not sure I will for a while. um, but I think it's important to be able to ask that question and to be able to sit in that question without coming to a resolution.
Yeah, maybe that's the most interesting part of it too, because by not having let's just say by not having a land acknowledgement in your bio, or
Yeah.
not having pronouns in your bio, or not having whatever
Yeah.
other element that many people put in their bios, like, is that for I think that can shut down a conversation, sadly,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Well, and I again, where I sit in the pronoun conversation on my Twitter bio, I don't have them. Um, I think for Instagram, you actually have to, like, they make you do it. Like, you have to have your pronouns in there, which again, I was like, whatever, I'll just put it in there. He, him, it's me. Good, moving on. Um, but I don't have a land acknowledgement in my Twitter bio. I don't have my pronouns in my Twitter bio. My Twitter bio is remarkably hashtaggy and everything else. Like, there's not a lot of, it's just information about what I do and who I am.
Hmm.
But it's not, there's none of that piece in there. And again, I'm not, I'm not saying that I'm right or I'm wrong, because I think allowing someone to sit in something for an extended period of time and to not make up their mind about a either like growing topic or an emerging topic or a what some would say a settled topic, I think that's okay. And there shouldn't be a, well, you need to make up your mind now, you need to make a statement now, you
Right.
need to have like this support statement or whatever. I don't feel like that's helpful. I think allowing someone and being okay with them to sit in it and go, I don't know what I think about this yet. I don't know how I feel about putting pronouns in my bio. I don't know how I feel about the land acknowledgement.
Yep.
And being okay with, okay, cool, moving on. Like, that doesn't become a point of contention because they're allowed to sit in it and still be able to figure out where they eventually will stand. And then when they make that stand, then yeah, absolutely. Let's dig into that. Why are you standing like that? What reasons led you to believe that? And because then that person will have spent the time sitting in it, going, here's why, here's my reasons, here's my explanation, here's my details, here's my research, here's my da 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 da. Um, and maybe that's part of the problem, that we don't, nobody sits in anything anymore. Okay, that's a very broad statement. I should amend that. Many or most or some. Let's try some. We'll
Yeah.
we'll try we'll couch this, because then there's going to be the statement that I'm painting with so broad a brush, and I don't want to do that. I want to be exceptionally diplomatic, as you have labeled me, which I own that label and I'm prideful with that label. I know that sounds weird, but I am. I take a lot of pride and kind of self-respect in that idea that I am doing my best to be exceptionally diplomatic. Anyway, my point of it is, um, some people just don't sit in something anymore.
Sure.
They
Yeah.
don't go, why am I upset about this? Why is this tweet making me mad? Why am I going to dash out a reply that's going to sound like a snarky, whatever? Hmm.
Yeah.
Wonder, and like having that 5 to 10 minutes, or maybe heck 24 hours to sit in it and go, what's my response going to do? How is this going to actually help the conversation? Is it going to be a snarky response that's going to earn me a couple of people going, yeah, yoo-hoo, like it? Or is it going to get me a place in a couple of years where someone pulls up the tweet at a job that I'm going to apply for and be like, hey, so we saw this whole pattern of you being snarky on social media, we're not going to hire you.
Right.
Like, that's my worry. Like, if I ever leave my district or whatever, if I go out into the world, they're going to review my social media, and
Sure.
I don't want them to see me being a jerk face.
Right.
Um, and okay, so I'm going to go back to that video real quick, because there's still some pieces to it. Unless you have anything else to
No,
add
no.
to
Go
that
ahead.
piece, I have so many tabs open. In the last few years, our society has come to believe that weaponized. I got to get to the next section. Um, Weaponized cruelty is a part of some well thought out master plan, which is so fascinating, because that's what we've been talking about.
Hmm.
Is that this, like, cruelty is seen by some as a cudgel to gain power. Empathy and kindness are considered weak. Many important people look at the vulnerable only as rungs on a ladder to the top. I'm here to tell you that when someone's path through this world is marked with acts of cruelty, they have failed the first test of an advanced society. And he gets applause on that.
Yep.
And it's very, I think it's interesting, because you look at that audience and there is some applause, but some of them are kind of having that look of like, huh,
Hmm.
really? I don't know how I feel about this. So it's not like a, whoa, yeah, you speak the truth, man. It's kind of like, they never forced their animal brain to evolve past its first instinct. They never forged new mental pathways to overcome their own instinctual fears. And so their thinking and problem solving will lack the imagination and creativity that the kindest people have in spades. And he ends it with the thing that he's learned in his many years of politics and everything else. He's found one thing to be universally true: the kindest person in the room is often the smartest. And I really like, I've went back to this video, and I've listened to it, and I've watched it, and I've replayed it. And I think that's the simplest thing, that if we could, if Elon Musk, our Lord and Savior and CEO, until the new person comes in, he's announced a new
Yep.
CEO coming. If that was to be, and I know this is a very broad brush, so there's people who are gonna be like, "That's dumb. Why are you doing that?" But if we were to take that and say maybe that's the cornerstone of Twitter in our conversations, is that having the compassion to have the hard conversations and the good conversations, having the being kind, and exploring the issues through those lenses, the discourse would be so much more elevated than just like, you're wrong, you're on the wrong side of history, why do you believe that, how dare you, the many, what, like all the sarcastic biting comments that come through. um
Yeah. Those comments there make me think of, I don't know if you saw this as well. There was a short video that someone had shared a couple of days ago, when RFK was asked, I think it was by, oh gosh, I'm going to forget her name. I can see her face. Elizabeth Vargas. He was doing an interview
yeah.
with her, and she asked him, and I'm not going to get this exactly, but she basically said, um, all of these terrible people, including Donald Trump, have praised you.
Hmm.
How does that make you feel, or what do you think about him? And it was
Hmm.
obviously, kind of a leading question, but his
Right.
response, I think, was actually kind of a brave one. He said, in at one point, the line that stood out to me, he said something to the effect of, "I'm proud that Donald Trump likes me."
Yeah.
Which out of context might sound horrible, but his point was like, he wants to be able to bring people together to have these conversations,
Yeah.
and he's not willing to just dismiss anyone. And I
Yeah.
think so. I think putting kindness first, I think would
Yeah.
be, and I think that was a kind, like, was that a kind response? I think that is a kind response.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know that it works. That's the sad part, right?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know that it can work, or I shouldn't say that. I think it could work. I don't think, at least now, I don't think we have the, I don't think we have the courage
Hmm.
to put kindness first, which is sad to
Yeah.
say.
No, I think, and I think, to kind of close this out, that the decline in discourse and rhetoric on Twitter is a reflection, obviously, of a larger issue in our culture. And when I say culture, I mean the culture of the United States, because there is kind of that nebulous, cloudy culture that we have in this country. Obviously, within that cloud, there are specific cultures. There is the teen culture. There's the young adult culture. There's the adult culture. There's the senior culture. There are cultures that are related to actual, like, people groups and things, like, so it's equal parts simple, like I say, and equal parts complex, because there's so much culture in the United States, which is beautiful and brilliant, and I love it,
Mhm.
because there's so many perspectives and so many ideas about things out there. And I think that's the part that I love. It's like, I can ask somebody in my classroom about, hey, what do you think about this? And I can get four different responses from students based upon the lives they've lived, the people they've lived with, the places they've lived, where they've come from, where they're going, what their dreams are. Like, again, so much meat and so much excitement in that conversation. But I don't think we're willing to do that. I don't think we're willing to go, yeah, so Donald Trump follows me, or he whatever. There was an interesting conversation. Actually, we might not be done here for a second, but someone was mentioning on Twitter about how they were glad that someone highlighted if someone liked a tweet or followed somebody that they didn't agree with,
Mhm.
and that was a big deal, and they that was a signal to them that that person wasn't doing right, or wasn't good, or
Mhm.
wasn't. And it was, I sat in that, and I don't even remember who said it, because I was afraid to like it, because then I was going to get
Mhm.
in trouble or something. And that's the thing about Twitter, is that the stupid like feature used to be like a favorite, like a star, and
Sure.
they changed it to likes. And so now the whole context is, well, you like that tweet. No, I just wanted to figure it out. I wanted to put a marker on it
Mhm.
so I could go back to it. Um, but I sat in that and I went, wait, so if I follow somebody you disagree with, um, and depending on the strength of your disagreement, what is you're now, I'm wrong, like, you're going to unfollow me, you're going to be in opposition to me, I'm wrong in your eyes, you believe that because I am interested in seeing what they're saying, and like, being aware of their conversations and being aware of their perspective, that that's wrong for me, and that if I like a tweet from somebody that you don't like, or you don't think is the right person to have that conversation, or whatever, that makes me wrong, like, I'm wrong for wanting to keep that conversation in my, like, and I mean, they'll probably say, well, you should bookmark it. Well, yeah, whatever. But it's easier just to click the like button than have to go to the click and bookmark whatever. But it's like, is that where we're at? Is
W-
that where we've come to? That
yes, sadly, yes. Well, even this
and I
idea of mutuals, I've seen, and you've probably seen this too. I've
yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen
yeah.
people tweet out like, "I can't believe," like to their, "I can't believe so many of my mutuals are
Yeah,
following this person."
yeah,
Like it, and then sometimes they'll go as far to say like, if you don't unfollow them, like we're done. Like
yeah.
I think I don't like that at all.
It comes back to that identity politics
Mm-hmm.
of I'm identifying with this ideal or this idealistic or this politic or whatever, this thing, this belief, this idea, and that idea doesn't allow you to follow or engage or do anything with this, that, and the other, because that's not right. That's not what we do here.
Right.
My identity and my identity is very much, and it's very much, I'm in a box and this is my identity, and you can't
Mm-hmm.
go to other boxes. Like, the box is very strict. There are walls. You can't go outside those walls. And if you do that, then we're done. You can't. How dare you follow that person?
Mm-hmm.
I'm fairly certain that if you go through my followers list, the people that I follow, and I follow 3,945 people. If you go through that list of 3,945 people, I am very certain you are going to find at least 10, maybe 20, maybe more that you're just like, what are you doing? How dare you? But here's the thing. I don't follow because I endorse. I follow because I want to know. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be able to be like, oh, that's interesting, or oh man, okay, now I'm aware of what's going on. I'm in the loop here. I can be aware of this if this comes up, or I get a lot of my news, the start of my news, through my follows, my Twitters, because I see a story or I see a mention and I go, okay, I need to go check that out. I need to go dig in. I need to go check out my blogs. I need to go do some research into this. And that's just how it's always been. Like, I get a lot of people ask me, "Oh, did you see that?" "Oh yeah, I saw it yesterday." "What?" "Yeah,
Yeah.
I saw it on Twitter. I saw that kind of tweet through. I saw someone like that, or I saw," like, the way that Twitter works is I can get that information faster and be able to track it and know what I'm like, get a handle on it and figure out, okay, if someone asks me, or if I have to respond to this, I need to be aware of it. And so, to that end, I think it's, and again, this is a very broad statement, so please do not take this as like me attacking people who say this, but I've used this word before, but I think it's dishonest, because you projecting onto me what you think I should be doing with my Twitter account and my what I am looking to get information on. That doesn't feel right. That feels like you're telling me how to live my life, which, correct me if I'm wrong, people get mad that there are segments of our Christian and our political subgroups who do that, who say, no, you need to do this, you need to live
Mm-hmm.
like this. And then they get mad because they're like, well, you can't tell me how to live my life. And it's like, well, then don't tell me how to live my life. Like,
Right.
and again, it's a very like sarcastic reply with not a lot of meat to it, as I've, being very mindful of that. But it's, I'm to bring it full circle, I'm a states' rights guy. Like, I have my rights to be able to use my Twitter account to follow who I want to follow, and it's not that I like them. I don't like, I follow. I'm sure I follow some people who are less than, like, people are just like, why do you follow that? Because I want to know. I don't want to be blind to what they're reporting on or what they're saying. I want to be able to be like, ooh, that's bad. Ooh, I need to be aware of that. I need to make sure I'm on top of this, because if that conversation comes up, I want to be, no, I want to be, no, I don't believe that. That's not cool. Stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, don't tell me how to run my Twitter account, and I won't tell you how to run yours. You can say what you want to say. Now, I might disagree with you. I might be like, hey, I've done that a couple times. Hey, that might not be a good look. Think about that. You do you, but whatever. Um, and so it's just, yeah. Is there hope for Twitter? I guess is our final question. Is there hope for this social media platform when it comes to how we talk to each other and how we engage with it? Is there, because we've talked about this both online and offline. It doesn't seem to be getting better. It seems to be getting more caustic. It seems to be getting more.
What's your weakness? What's your type? Somehow I want